What's up, garden friends? Jeff here, Tropical Plant Party. How's everybody doing? Are you good? I hope you're good. I'm great. I have just been tagged by Rick, so let's do this orchid tag. All right, so number one, what part of the world are you from? I am in St. Louis, Missouri, which is smack dab in the middle of the United States. So my growing zone, I'm right on the border of 6A and 6B, like right where they touch. Number two, how long have you been growing orchids? Well, I want to say I got my first orchid when I was probably around 8 years old, mid-90s, so potentially, 20-something years. But I've been most actively growing orchids for the last probably 15. Number three, what got you started growing orchids? Well, for me, my aunt, who lives in Seattle, Washington, she had and has an immense orchid collection and lots of bonsai. And as a child, I was just absolutely fascinated by all of it. And so that's really what got me into it. And up in the Pacific Northwest, things are cool and moist up there. And she had lots of mastavillas and paphiopedulums and fragopediums, and just her collection is phenomenal. And that's what got me into orchids. I've always loved everything tropical, and orchids are really, in my mind, when I think tropical, I think of palm trees and orchids. It's just the association I've always had there, so naturally I love orchids. To me, they're kind of a symbol of the tropics and the rainforest, even though orchids grow all over the place, not just in the tropics. Okay, number four, what do you use as your growing space? Well, we're in it. Here's my growing space, I refer to as my grow room. And this is where I keep my orchids in the fall and winter and early spring. Really late fall, probably November through April. They usually come out around the first week of May. It just depends. Like I said, I'm in the middle of the country and the weather's very unpredictable. Some years are much warmer than others, and some springs start very early. It just depends. But right now, this is my indoor grow space. It's my garage. I've converted it and put an aquaponics pond in here and just done all kinds of things. It's too elaborate and maybe boring to go into in this video, but in another one, I have other videos about the grow space. Number five, how many genres of orchids do I have? Well, I really do not know. That's a good question. I have Phalaenopsis, Paphiopedulums, Fragopediums, all different types of Oncidiums, Lilias, Cattleyas, Epidendrums, tons and tons and tons of Vandas, Grammatophyllums. Really, I stay away from anything that's cool growing just because it doesn't work for me. It's too much work. So I love mastavillas and the different Dracula orchids, but not for me. And even Paphiopedulums, I only have a few Paphiopedulums. The Super Suck is my favorite because of my paphs, because it seems to not necessarily mind the heat quite as much as some of the others that I've grown. And that's back there. See that? That's the Super Suck. I don't know, I'm sorry. And that leads into number six, which I also do not know the answer to, and that is, how many orchids do I have? I do have an Excel spreadsheet that I keep track of all of my orchids on, like an inventory, but I pretty much ignore the number column as much as possible. Last time I checked, when I included all of my seedlings and everything, I want to say it was over 200. The bulk of those being Vandaceous orchids. So as you can see, I have orchids here, a whole bunch of them. I also have orchids in my house. Here, we can go on a little walk. I'm trying to keep this smooth though. I'm just in the process of moving everything into the grow space, so pardon the mess and the chaos. So this is my biggest Grammatophyllum, that's the Wallacei, right there. Keep my Cymbidiums over here on the table for now, because this time of year, sometimes they like to be moved in and out. The nice cool temperatures with bright sun, so keep them close to the door for right now. Some of my Cymbidiums are actually still outside. Then over here, I just kind of have about a 12-foot long wall that's just filled with orchids. They're hanging from the ceiling. They're all over the place. I know it's really dark right now. That's just because it's dark outside. These windows actually let in a lot of light for them, so it's just a cloudy day. That's all. They get plenty of light. They need to be reorganized for the indoor growing season, though. I need to move my phals. I need to move my phals to the darker spaces, my cats to the brighter spaces, and get all that stuff going. It's a work in progress. And wouldn't you know, the day of the orchid tag, a lot of the orchids that have been in bloom for a very long time decided they were over it and they didn't want to bloom anymore. Oh well. I've got a nice basket full of better grow orchids over here that I'm kind of rehabbing. So like I just said, I don't really have an exact number for how many I have. I'm not counting them. You can't make me. Number seven, what is my top orchid pet peeve? Kind of a tricky one. I would say something that has always kind of irked me. Not so much now as in the past, but, and I'm not speaking of anybody specifically, just know that. But within the orchid community, there was sometimes an awful lot of condescending behavior. And that's something that just kind of always rubbed me the wrong way. I think it's off-putting. I think that we want more people to be involved in orchids. We want more people growing them, because the more people who are growing them, the more we can learn about the hobby. So we all bounce and feed off of each other. And being condescending about it is a turnoff to people who might be interested in getting into it. You know, there are just some people who like to brag about what they were doing in a sense that made it seem like they were doing the impossible. And I don't think that's the right way to go about it. I mean, sure, pat on the back, good job, you keep your orchids alive, that's great, but it's better to teach than to be a butthead. So that's all for that one. Number 8, what is my favorite place to buy my orchids and my least favorite place to buy my orchids? For my Vandas, I prefer Moats. They have the best selection and their shipping's really cheap. But overall, I really like Hauserman and Odom's orchids, so I don't order from Odom's that often because, you know, things are kind of pricey. Santa Barbara Orchids is also phenomenal. They have an amazing selection of. My least favorite place to buy orchids lately, I would say not a specific seller, but overall eBay. I've just had too many bad experiences at this point. You know, you can read the reviews and talk to the seller all you want to. You don't always know what you're getting. There are obviously ways to go about making sure you're getting the right thing, but I've had too many instances where I've had an orchid delivered that was sick and diseased, and I had to just throw them away. So eBay is probably like my least favorite place to buy orchids at this time, but it's also my favorite because of the selection. Does that make any sense? Probably not. Okay, number 9. What is the worst advice you've ever been given, and did you take it? At one point, I did have someone who tried to convince me that to soak my orchids in ammonia, because that would help get like they were saying it would get dust off of the roots or something, and they would absorb nutrients. But that was pretty stupid. I didn't look into it or explore it, but I was just like, nah, I'm not gonna do that, because they didn't talk about diluting it or anything. It was just like, just you know, fill a bucket up with ammonia and throw your orchids in there. No. Oh yeah, no, I didn't take it, because that would be stupid. Number 10, which are your 5 favorite orchids? Well, in no particular order, Zygopetalums, they're in my top 5. I'd say that's in there. They smell amazing. They're very easy to grow for me. They flower like crazy, and they're just, I love them. I love the Zygopetalums. Oncidium Cherry Baby, I have probably a dozen of them because they smell amazing. That's also one of my favorites, and they grow pretty quick. They don't flower very fast, but man, they grow quick. Encyclias, that smells good, but I don't know if I'm gonna put that in my top 5. The Pachara, Vanda Pachara's Delight. Well, maybe not my favorite Vanda, but I would say this is the orchid I recommend the most to people when they say they want to grow Vandas, just because it's a pretty resilient strain. I mean, isn't she pretty? Oh, she's so pretty. Ah, crap. How many was that? So was that Zygopetalum, Cherry Baby, Pachara Vanda. My Epichat Rene Marquis. That one's behind my Oncidium. It's not in flower right now. There's really nothing to see, but I love the flowers on there, the green and the pink and the little bit of yellowish orange. So pretty. And lastly, number 5, or probably number 1, my all-time favorite orchid has always been the Laelia Santa Barbara Sunset Showtime. The variety called Streaker, I have both, and those are by far my favorites. I just love the colors on the flowers. They fade with the pink and the orange, and beautiful Laelias, and they always bloom for me fairly well. The characteristics of the flowers on the Laelia Santa Barbara Sunset, really all Laelias, but I love how they send that flower out. They shoot that spike out really, really far. So dramatic, and I love that about it. Number 11, tell a funny orchid story. Well, this kind of goes back to number 3, which is the what got you started growing orchids, and my first orchid was a dendrobium, and it's not really a funny story, but basically the collection I have now is my second collection. So I got my first orchid when I was 8 years old, and it was a dendrobium from Home Depot, and it was $8. I remember that very specifically because my father said he did not want to spend $8 on something that looked like a pickle, and I always thought that was funny. And then from there and on, I mean, I had so many orchids. I had oncidiums that were like, the clumps were the size of basketballs, and it was amazing. And then during construction several years ago, more than several years ago, 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, when the swimming pool was being put in here, I was at work, or maybe I was at school, I don't remember. I wasn't home, so I may have you know, been off at a lecture or something like that. But the pool construction people came over to remove the old patio. It was just a little concrete slab, and all my orchids were on there. And they took them and set them in the sun. And it was July, and it was a summer. El Nino was going on during that summer. It was like 104 degrees. And I came home that evening, and all of my orchids were dead, just black, burnt. They were just absolutely fried. I lost that entire collection. I don't have a single one of those. And that could have been easily avoided. They didn't know. It's not their fault. I should have moved them, but I didn't. They weren't supposed to start construction in that area that day, so it is what it is. It happened. And then I went a couple years without any orchids because it just kind of bummed me out, and I was kind of frankly still sort of pissed and grieving the loss of my collection. And then you know, probably around 2008 or 2009, I went ahead and I started getting back into things, and now I have an awful lot. The oldest orchid in my collection is probably, I don't know, maybe that Sherry Baby back there, this Pachara that I just showed you. Those I've had for several years. My newest orchids are my Gremnophyllums that I just got within the past 6 months. Okay, number 12, what advice would I give someone starting an orchid collection? What advice would I give to the noobs? I think the first piece of advice I would give somebody who's starting a new collection would be to not get intimidated and to try to not overthink things. Figure out what the basics are and start there. Do not overlook water quality. That's extremely important, but remember, water, light, airflow, humidity, nutrients. These are the key basics, and then expand on those things. So what about water is important, meaning the pH, alkalinity, and know your orchids. You know, start off with cheap orchids. And when you want to expand things, like, you know, if you want to pick up an oncidium, then look up its natural habitat. Where does that oncidium grow? What is it like for that orchid year-round? Can you mimic those conditions? To me, that's always been one of the easiest ways to research an orchid is, where does this come from? What's its natural range? Try and find pictures of it in the wild. There are people who go out and film orchids in their native habitat. And see what's going on there and see what you can do to try and come as close to that as possible within your home. Get involved in orchid communities. So YouTube, great place. Obviously, here we are right now. Watch people's videos, talk to them in the comments section. There's so much to learn, and there is a lot of misinformation out there. So do not hesitate to second guess anything anybody ever tells you. In fact, research it yourself. It should be okay. Oh, also, don't be afraid to kill an orchid. Probably weren't expecting me to say that, were you? Well, unfortunately, it's the reality of the hobby. Sometimes we lose orchids. They die, it happens, and it's okay. You'd figure out why that happened. Why did the orchid die? What went wrong? And don't do it again. That's how we learn. And lastly, watch the roots of your plants. Pay attention to the roots. When you're growing orchids, you're really growing their roots. The more roots they have, the better they're probably going to do. So keep an eye on those roots. Okay, it's time to wrap this up. But first, look how pretty the maple trees are. Yeah, I'm only showing that right now because it's about 80 degrees outside, and in a few hours it's supposed to be 40 degrees, which means tornado weather. So those leaves will be gone before I have the chance to show them again. So that was pretty. You're welcome. And the last thing I'm supposed to do here is tag 2 other people. So I actually spent a really long time going through different people's channels. I wanted to make sure I didn't nominate anybody who's already done the orchid tag. I want to make sure I didn't tag anybody who's already done the orchid tag. NYC Orchid Queen, tag you're it. She's got lots of fun stuff on her channel. Whole bunch of orchid videos. And Blanca Acosta. Blanca, I dug through. I didn't see an orchid tag on your channel, so if you haven't done it, tag you're it. Blanca is awesome. She's got lots and lots of beautiful orchids. Alright, so that's gonna do it. I hope that this comes together okay. Sorry if it's a little bit all over the place, but you know, like I said before, welcome to my channel. I hope everybody's doing well. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment down below. I love talking to y'all. You can follow me on my social media. There is Instagram, Tropical Plant Party, and then on Twitter, Tropical Plant JC. All that fun stuff is on my page. Okay, and that's all for now. Keep on growing, everybody. Bye-bye.